What's your earliest memory of the location in Fishersville where the soldiers were being brought during World War II?
Well, of course, I remember the newspaper articles which told us there was such a thing as being built and opened. And the first time I saw it was when I went out to apply for a job. And it was huge, almost entirely on one floor. The buildings didn't look real permanent, but it had been thrown up, I suppose, in a hurry. And finding my way to where I eventually worked, which was the Post Exchange, which is sort of like a miniature store with a soda fountain and so forth. I got lost several times, but finally found a Mr. Bowman who was the manager. There was one other man who was his assistant, and I can't remember his name. But after my interview, Mr. Bowman said that I was hired and I would be working in the soda fountain with one other employee. That other employee turned out to be a friend of mine, Donald Trainham. I was 16 at the time. Donald was probably 17. He was a year ahead of me in school. But we were friends, and the two of us ran what amounted to a soda fountain. We sold soft drinks, milkshakes, hot dogs, hamburgers. We had a separate room, but we connected with the main Post Exchange where maybe 15 or 20 young women worked. And they were all women. No men worked there other than the manager, of course. And in that section, they sold other things, candy, cigarettes, clothing, toiletries. But we were all one unit. The soda fountain stayed busy most of the day. Donald and I were paid 50 cents an hour to work there. We just thought that was an outrageous price. We'd never seen so much money. And something I had never heard of was time and a half for overtime. I said, man, that's really something. So every hour over 40 that we worked, they paid us 75 cents an hour. It turned out that Donald and I got plenty of overtime because the Army required the PX to take inventory every 2 weeks. For some reason unknown to me, the ladies in the main PX had a great deal of trouble coming up with the right numbers. They would count items, and one lady would get this number, and one lady would get another number. Finally, Donald and I would end up having to do the work of inventory in not only our soda shop, but also in the main PX. And we didn't mind that because of that time and a half. The soldiers...
If I could just, excuse me for just one moment. I want to, my apologies. I just want to make sure I move this because I don't want it to look like it's coming out of your head. Which would be good, right?
Right.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about these guys that we would be with every day.
Well, of course, this was a hospital. A large number of patients, I'm sure, were bedridden, and we never saw these. They didn't frequent our soda fountain. But a good percentage were ambulatory of a sort. They would get about on canes, wheelchairs, walkers, what have you. Some were in casts, it seemed to me, from neck to feet, but they were in that wheelchair and their arms were moving, and they would come in. Wheelchairs were a problem. The corridors at Woodrow Wilson Army Hospital were very long, straight, and relatively narrow. And these fellows in the wheelchairs, pretty soon the competitive spirit would take over and they would have drag races. Well, this resulted in a lot of arguments over who won or not, but the worst thing was they sometimes ran into other patients or each other. And after a while, we had stop signs posted in the corridors and speed limits set for the wheelchairs. And if you were caught doing something you weren't supposed to do, you lost your wheelchair privileges for a week. Of course, that didn't stop the wheelchair racers from racing. I was amazed at the upbeat attitude of the patients. Some with missing limbs, some, like I said, with casts, seemed to me, from neck to toe. I never saw much moping around or feeling sorry for themselves. They were upbeat. They joked with each other. Huge arguments would break out over whose section of the country was better than the other person's. The guys from Brooklyn were the loudest and would fight at the drop of a hat if they could have moved their arms. It was an eye-opener for me, seeing this mass of humanity, broken limbs, lost limbs, whatever, and acting just like normal people. I was told by Mr. Bowman that I had a new task coming up. In the spring and summer of '45, they were going to have exhibition baseball and softball games for the entertainment of the patients at the hospital. These, of course, would be outside on the ball diamond. And I would be in charge of selling Cokes, Dr. Peppers, and beer at these games. I said, I'm not sure I'm old enough, I was 16, to sell beer, and I certainly don't want to get arrested for doing so. Mr. Bowman explained that we were on an Army post and that the state regulations didn't all apply to us. And besides, the beer was only 3.2% alcohol, which made it very close to a soft drink. I decided not to stand on technicalities and jeopardize my 50 cents an hour. So I agreed to sell the beer and the soft drinks at the ball games. Then the real shock came. He said I would need help because the beer and the soft drinks would be iced down in these huge wash buckets. They'd be very heavy. I couldn't lift them, of course, but he was providing 4 men to help. And the 4 men were German prisoners of war. Well, that scared the pants off of me. I could envision myself being abducted, held hostage while these Nazis escaped and went back to Germany or wherever. It turned out these guys were not only very helpful, but they were very friendly, and they seemed perfectly at ease and glad to be out of the shooting war. They were delighted to be where they were. So I was not in danger of being abducted and held hostage while they went back to Germany.
Did you have any idea, I mean, were they stationed there or were they someplace else?
I know at Ingleside Resort, we housed a number of high-ranking Italian and German prisoners. But these were enlisted men. I'm not sure where they lived. We had a number that worked around the hospital grounds, doing yard work and so forth. My four primarily did that kind of work, except when we had the ball games and they came over to help me. We could communicate pretty good. Two of these gentlemen spoke passable English, and they would relay to the others whatever my commands were. I wasn't too aggressive with regard to commands, but I didn't need to be. These guys were helpful, glad to be where they were. They were sort of like the patients. Beat up as the patients were, and broken as they were. I think they were glad to be out of the shooting war, and I think the German POWs were the same.
It's, you know, I think about what it must have been like for you. You're getting all of this information from your family, from the newspaper, from the media at the time of you know, the German enemy. And then you're asked to work with them. And for a teenager, I bet that was an interesting feeling.
Like I said in the beginning, I was treading on eggshells. Towards the end, they were just like any other guys, and we got along fine together. In fact, they got along fine with the patients. Those that could, the two that could speak English in a fashion would, when they finally learned what baseball was about, which took a while, they would tell a guy he got a good hit or made a good play. We used to get to the hospital by bus. They had an Army bus that I'm sure was built around 1919. It made the damnedest sounds you've ever heard. And when the driver would shift gears, you knew something bad had happened and everything had fallen out on the street. But somehow, this bus would make it from the Staunton bus station to the Army hospital. And it ran a regular route from about 6 in the morning to midnight. And the people that worked at the hospital are those who were leaving to visit in town would ride the bus on a regular bus schedule. There was only the one bus, and it went back and forth and back and forth.
And that's how you got to work.
And I got to work by catching it at the Staunton bus station, which was on North Central Avenue, about where the Howard Johnson Motor Inn is now, sort of across from BB&T, Scott and Stringfellow. The bus ride was interesting. I was just a teenager, 16. Mostly in the morning, it was the ladies going to work. They ranged from 20 to 30 years of age. I had no idea. And their conversation absolutely floored me. They were talking about things I had never heard about before, and almost all of them had some kind of major problem at least once in the trip. A bad letter or no letters. The ladies' room at the PX was situated near the soda fountain. And at least once a day, one or more of these ladies would pass through the soda fountain on the way to the ladies' powder room in tears or obviously in distress over something. When I asked Mr. Bowman what was why did this occur, he said, well, they're just women. I never heard any other explanation. But I'd formed the opinion that women were certainly more emotional than men. I enjoyed my work there. I found out one aspect that I didn't know existed. We had a polio scare on my block. We lived on Glen Avenue in Staunton. And a child there contracted polio. And they decided to quarantine all the children that lived on Glen Avenue in that block for a week, which meant I had to stay home and I couldn't go to work. They paid me anyway. It was called sick leave. And I wasn't even sick, but I was delighted to learn that I could get money for not doing anything. But I guess that's the government for you. I was in favor of it at the time. But I enjoyed my time there. As I look back, I realized the price that some of these men paid to protect our country. At the time, that didn't dawn on me. I saw them, they were in casts. Well, they were in a hospital, they're supposed to be in a cast. And they were upbeat. The only argument seemed to be over who came from the best place in the United States. They didn't talk a whole lot about the war, at least not around us in the soda shop. I didn't hear anybody complaining about losing their leg or their arm or whatever. They, I think, like the German POWs, were just glad to be out of the shooting end of it. Now, as I look back on it, I realize the price many of those people paid. A lot fell in love with the Valley. I know of at least 3 former patients who I would see from time to time long after I had finished working there, living in Staunton. I would see them downtown at, it's where the Doebele restaurant is now, but it was an ice cream parlor at the time, and I can remember seeing, I revisited, I was an experienced ice cream man myself, and I would go in for ice cream, and I would see one of the former patients, and they were now living in Staunton. So the Valley did have an attraction for them. But the hospital was a good thing for the Valley. A lot of the local people came out, and they weren't paid 50 cents an hour, but they would write letters for the patients who were unable to write because of their wounds, or read letters to those who had been blinded. They would deliver books and just talk. Jean Myers, who was a young girl at that time,